Mark Reynolds and Sophie Carter had lived in the quiet village of Ashwood all their lives, never imagining that just beyond their backyards, a £24 million criminal empire was thriving in plain sight. They drove past barns, fields, and narrow lanes every day, but one hidden building would soon turn their peaceful countryside into the epicenter of Britain's biggest rural drug bust. This is the story of how a secret cartel operated right under their noses, and how authorities finally brought it crashing down. In the rolling hills of northern England, the countryside looked like a postcard. Golden fields swayed gently in the wind, narrow lanes wound past cottages, with smoke curling from their chimneys, and farm animals grazed lazily under the soft afternoon sun. To anyone driving through, it was a picture of peace, a slice of rural life untouched by the chaos of city crime. But beneath this calm surface, a hidden world of lawlessness was quietly taking root, invisible to the casual eye. For months, local authorities had been puzzled by reports of unusual activity. Farmers noticed strangers driving slowly along quiet lanes, taking notes or photographing barns and outbuildings. Residents mentioned sudden spikes in electricity bills that didn't match their usage. A few noticed strange deliveries, unmarked vans pulling up in the dead of night, leaving crates that disappeared behind seemingly ordinary farm doors. None of it made sense at first. The village had never been a hotspot for crime, and people assumed the anomalies were harmless. The breakthrough came when investigators traced the electricity anomalies to a modest-looking barn on the outskirts of town. From the outside it looked abandoned, a weathered wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof. A few pigeons perched on the beams, and the faint hum of machinery could barely be heard over the wind. Nothing about it suggested the scale of what lay inside. Authorities moved cautiously, aware that first impressions could be deceiving. When the doors finally opened, the scene was breathtaking and terrifying. Rows upon rows of cannabis plants stretched into the shadows, illuminated by harsh artificial lighting that mimicked the sun. The smell hit instantly, a pungent, almost suffocating aroma that clung to clothes and hair. It was clear that this was not a hobbyist setup. It was a full-scale industrial operation. Sophisticated hydroponic systems pumped water and nutrients to each plant with mechanical precision. Humidifiers, fans, and climate control units were all calibrated to create the perfect growing environment. Every detail suggested meticulous planning and expert knowledge. As authorities moved through the barn, they discovered hidden compartments and false walls, clever tricks designed to conceal the operation from casual inspection or even a routine drone survey. Thousands of plants were packed tightly together, some already nearing harvest, others still small but thriving. The realization hit hard. This modest barn represented millions of pounds in potential profit. Calculations estimated the total value at over £24 million, a staggering figure for a single rural location. The scale of the operation hinted at something far larger than anyone had imagined. This was not a rogue farmer or a small-time dealer. The barn was just one node in a sprawling network that likely spanned the country. Authorities suspected that similar setups were hidden across rural England, each farm feeding into a supply chain that reached urban streets, nightclubs, and overseas markets. It was an eye-opening moment. The countryside, long viewed as safe and sleepy, was being used as a shield for one of the UK's most profitable illegal industries. Neighbors were shocked when the news broke. Many admitted they had driven past the barn countless times without a second thought. The thought that millions of pounds of illegal cannabis were growing just a stone's throw from their homes was almost impossible to comprehend. Some residents recalled hearing strange noises late at night or seeing lights flickering through the trees, but had dismissed them as machinery or seasonal work. The realization that they had unknowingly lived next to a criminal empire created a mixture of fear, fascination, and disbelief. Even among law enforcement, the discovery sparked both excitement and concern. On one hand, it was a significant victory, a chance to dismantle a major illegal operation. On the other, it exposed how sophisticated rural crime had become. The barn, hidden in plain sight, was proof that organized criminal networks were capable of exploiting even the most unsuspecting communities. It was a chilling reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that beneath the tranquil beauty of the countryside, a dangerous, hidden world was quietly thriving. The discovery of the barn was only the beginning. As investigators dug deeper, the true scale of the operation began to emerge, revealing a level of organization that far exceeded anyone's expectations. This was not the work of a lone farmer or a handful of local criminals. The barn was a single cog in a highly coordinated network, a cartel operating in the shadows of Britain's countryside. The sophistication of the setup suggested not only experience but careful planning, as if a detail had been designed to evade detection for years. Authorities soon uncovered evidence that the cartel operated like a legitimate business, but one where law enforcement was the greatest threat. Delivery schedules were precise, security was layered, and communication was encrypted and coded. Every member had a defined role, from the growers who tended the plants to the couriers who transported them under the cover of night. Even locals who had unwittingly passed by the barn played a part in the system, providing unintentional cover for the operation simply by their presence. The more investigators learned, the clearer it became that this was an industrial-scale enterprise, one designed for maximum profit and minimal risk of exposure. The use of rural areas as a base was no accident. Remote fields and barns offered both concealment and distance from law enforcement hubs. Satellite images showed clusters of similar properties with suspicious electricity patterns, suggesting the cartel had a network of farms carefully spread across different counties. The organization's leaders understood that urban centers drew attention, while the quiet countryside allowed their operations to grow largely unnoticed. The irony was sharp. The very landscapes associated with safety and serenity were being exploited for massive criminal gain. Inside the barn, investigators found layers of security that hinted at the cartel's resources and reach. Hidden cameras monitored every entrance, some wired directly to mobile devices, allowing the growers to see anyone approaching from miles away. Motion sensors triggered alarms, and reinforced doors protected storage rooms filled with harvested cannabis ready for distribution. There were even false floors and secret compartments designed to mislead anyone who tried to inspect the premises. Every innovation pointed to a single truth: the people behind this farm were calculating and ruthless, aware that discovery could cost them millions. The more investigators pieced together, the more disturbing the picture became. The cartel didn't operate in isolation. There were links to violent gangs in cities across the UK, groups willing to enforce debts, protect shipments, and eliminate rivals. This network extended beyond the countryside, reaching warehouses, docks, and urban distribution centers. The 24 million barn was just one visible piece of a much larger puzzle, one that spanned counties and even international borders. What seemed like a local crime was in reality part of a vast, interconnected criminal empire. Locals were stunned as the investigation unfolded. People who had lived in the area for decades struggled to reconcile the tranquil scenery with the criminal activity that had been hiding in plain sight. Many admitted to passing the barn hundreds of times without suspecting a thing. Some recalled unusual vehicles or the occasional nighttime light but dismissed it as farm work or seasonal preparation. The realization that organized crime had been operating literally in their backyard shook the community to its core, replacing complacency with a mixture of fear, anger, and curiosity. Authorities, meanwhile, recognized the opportunity and the danger simultaneously. This was a chance to dismantle a major criminal network and send a message that even rural areas were not immune to sophisticated crime. Yet, the investigation also exposed the cartel's ingenuity and adaptability. If one farm was discovered, another could easily replace it elsewhere. The leaders of this network had planned for contingencies, making the challenge of stopping them far more complex than anyone had initially imagined. Every day of surveillance, every phone tapped, every van followed was part of a delicate game of patience and strategy. It became clear that the countryside was no longer the quiet sanctuary many believed it to be. Hidden in barns, fields, and isolated properties, Criminals were finding new ways to exploit isolation, technology, and the assumption of innocence. The barn was a revelation, but it was also a warning. Organized crime in Britain had evolved. It was sophisticated, mobile, and clever enough to hide in plain sight, operating with a level of precision and secrecy that left even experienced investigators both impressed and unsettled. As investigators continued to explore the cartel's operations, the true dangers hidden within the barn became painfully clear. From the outside, it seemed like a simple storage shed, a neglected corner of the countryside. Inside, however, the environment was a maze of hazards, designed to maximize growth and profit without any regard for human safety. High-voltage electricity ran through every wall and ceiling, powering artificial lights that simulated the sun 24 hours a day. The heat inside was almost unbearable, with humidifiers pumping moisture into the air, creating a stifling, suffocating atmosphere. The combination of intense light, heat, and moisture made the barn feel more like an industrial greenhouse than a criminal hideout. But it was also a trap, a place where a single misstep could be deadly. Investigators found evidence that some workers were there against their will. Contracts and notes suggested coercion, debts owed, or threats made against family members. The cartel maintained control through fear, intimidation, and manipulation. These were not simple criminals trying to grow a few plants. They were running a tightly controlled operation, where every person had a role, and failure or disobedience was met with swift consequences. The realization that human lives were being risked for profit added a grim layer to the case, transforming it from a story of illegal drugs into a tale of exploitation and cruelty. Chemical hazards were everywhere. Fertilizers, pesticides, and solvents were stored in unmarked containers, sometimes in areas with poor ventilation. Investigators learned, the more they understood the cartel's reach and ruthlessness. The barn was not isolated. It had connections to urban criminal networks that could enforce debts, intimidate witnesses, or eliminate threats. Evidence of communication with city gangs suggested that any challenge to the operation in the countryside could trigger violent consequences far beyond the rural borders. The cartel's influence spanned counties, and the risks of disrupting it were immediate and real. Local residents struggled to reconcile the beauty of the countryside with the hidden horrors beneath it. What had seemed like serene farmland was, in reality, a hub of danger, secrecy, and human exploitation. Those who had passed the barn unknowingly had glimpsed only the surface, unaware of the heat, the chemicals, and the fear that defined life inside. For investigators, this duality, outward calm and hidden danger, was a constant reminder of how easily appearances could deceive. By the time authorities left the barn for the day, the magnitude of the operation was undeniable. The cartel had created a self-contained, high-risk world designed to produce wealth while shielding its leaders from exposure. Each plant represented not just money but danger. Each hidden compartment symbolized the careful planning and calculated risks taken to protect the empire. The barn was more than a farm. It was a fortress, a trap, and a warning. The countryside could no longer be seen as a safe haven. It was now a battleground where criminal ingenuity met human vulnerability, and where every discovery brought new questions about how far these networks could reach before they were caught. After months of surveillance and intelligence gathering, authorities finally had enough information to plan a full-scale operation. They knew the stakes were high, the cartel was dangerous, the barn was fortified, and one wrong move could allow the criminals to escape or destroy evidence. Every detail had to be precise. Officers studied the barn from every angle, analyzing security cameras, patrol schedules, and even the timing of deliveries. Each piece of intelligence was like a puzzle, and one misstep could unravel the entire operation. The tension was palpable, as every day that passed was a day the cartel could grow more suspicious or relocate. The cartel had prepared for this possibility. They had installed alarms triggered by motion sensors, reinforced doors, and surveillance that extended for hundreds of meters beyond the property line. Lookouts were stationed in the surrounding fields, blending into the landscape, ready to signal the team inside at the first sign of trouble. Authorities realized that the criminals had thought of nearly everything, relying on the barn's isolation and the predictability of rural life to shield themselves. But law enforcement had a critical advantage: patience, strategy, and the knowledge that even the most meticulous plan could have weaknesses. The breakthrough came in the form of a small oversight. One camera, mounted near a secondary entrance, had failed due to a blown fuse. A door leading to a hidden storage room had been left unlocked, likely by a worker unaware of its importance. It was a narrow opening, barely noticeable, but it offered law enforcement a way inside without triggering the main security system. The officers knew this single point of access could decide the outcome. Any hesitation, and the cartel could have detected the intrusion and vanished before a single arrest was made. The raid began before dawn. Helicopters hovered quietly above the fields, their spotlights cutting through the early mist. Teams moved silently through the tall grass, guided by night vision equipment and pre-planned routes. Drones scanned the area, relaying real-time images of the barn and its surroundings. Inside, the cartel was unaware that their empire was moments from being dismantled. The hum of artificial lights and the heat from thousands of plants filled the space, masking the approaching footsteps of law enforcement. It was a race against time, with tension thick enough to be felt in every breath. When officers breached the barn through the side door, they were met with a mix of chaos and precision. The criminals had tried to hide or destroy evidence, but the false floors, secret compartments, and hidden rooms could not conceal everything. Thousands of plants were seized, hydroponic systems dismantled, and caches of cash and equipment were secured. Officers discovered cleverly hidden rooms where harvested cannabis had been stored for distribution, proving the operation was ready to ship large quantities at any moment. The scale of the cartel's empire became clearer with every room searched, every plant counted, and every secret compartment uncovered. The arrests were swift and decisive. Key members of the cartel were taken into custody without incident, their plans and vengeance meticulously documented. Investigators noted that the leaders had relied on fear, secrecy, and the rural isolation to protect themselves. Yet even the most careful preparation had failed in the face of patient, coordinated law enforcement. The dismantling of the barn sent a clear message: no matter how sophisticated the network, even the most fortified operations had vulnerabilities that could be exploited. By the end of the day, the barn was transformed from a secret criminal fortress into an empty shell, a monument to both the ingenuity and the hubris of those who had built it. The raid marked not just a tactical victory, but a symbolic one, revealing the hidden dangers lurking in Britain's countryside and exposing a criminal operation that had thrived in plain sight for years. The discovery would echo beyond the fields, forcing both the public and authorities to reconsider the vulnerabilities of rural communities and the lengths criminals would go to exploit them. The raid had ended, but the story was far from over. News of the 24 million cannabis operation spread quickly, shocking both local communities and the nation. For the residents of the countryside, the revelation was almost unimaginable. The quiet village streets, the rolling fields, and the peaceful cottages they had taken for granted had been hiding a dangerous, highly organized criminal enterprise all along. Some residents felt anger, realizing that criminals had exploited their trust and familiarity with the land. Others were struck by fear, aware that the same methods could be used elsewhere, and that what had been uncovered was only a fraction of the larger network. The countryside, long thought to be a sanctuary from crime, had proven to be a fertile ground for organized operations, cleverly hidden and meticulously maintained. Authorities worked quickly to dismantle every trace of the operation. The barn was stripped of plants, equipment, and hidden compartments. Forensic teams scoured the site for evidence of other criminal activity, including links to urban gangs and trafficking routes. Investigators traced communications, analyzed financial records, and pieced together the structure of the cartel. The scope of the network revealed that rural areas across multiple counties could be similarly exploited, highlighting a new frontier in criminal strategy. Each discovery prompted authorities to rethink how rural law enforcement should operate, and how to detect hidden operations before they reached this scale. The arrest sent shockwaves through organized crime circles. Key figures behind the operation faced charges that would likely keep them in prison for years, and investigators hoped their capture would dismantle or at least disrupt the wider network. Yet even with these victories, law enforcement remained cautious. Criminals who survived the raid could adapt, relocating farms to new, more remote locations, or using technology to evade detection. The success of the operation was a reminder that vigilance must be constant, and that rural crime was evolving rapidly, adapting to the assumptions of safety that most communities took for granted. Local residents, meanwhile, struggled to come to terms with what had occurred so close to home. Many reflected on the subtle signs they had overlooked: the strange vehicles, the lights flickering through the trees at night, the occasional hum of machinery that had seemed ordinary. Some admitted a lingering unease, realizing that for years they had unknowingly shared their village with a criminal empire. The community's sense of security had been shaken, replaced by a cautious awareness that even in the most serene landscapes, danger could thrive unseen. Journalists and media outlets flocked to the site, capturing images of the empty barn and documenting the scale of the operation. The story became a symbol of both criminal ingenuity and law enforcement perseverance. Viewers across the country were captivated by the contrast: a peaceful, picturesque countryside hiding a £24 million illegal enterprise. The narrative was compelling, not just for the financial magnitude, but for the human and technological complexity behind it. Experts weighed in, warning that the case illustrated vulnerabilities in rural policing and the need for more advanced surveillance and intelligence methods. As the barn sat empty under the winter sun, investigators and locals alike understood the lesson it left behind. The cartel had been ambitious, meticulous, and ruthless, exploiting isolation, secrecy, and the assumption of safety to build a multi-million-pound empire. Its fall, though dramatic, was not the end of rural crime. It was a warning. For every operation uncovered, dozens more could still exist, quietly hidden in barns, fields, and remote properties across the UK. The countryside, it seemed, was no longer just a symbol of tranquility. It had become a testing ground for criminal ingenuity, a place where danger could thrive in plain sight, and a reminder that even the most familiar landscapes could hide secrets capable of shocking an entire nation.